Hey everyone, it's Mr. Egbert. So this week is we're still talking about polynomials, but we're going to talk about factoring polynomials by using something called GCF. And you can see the letters GCF up here in the upper right-hand corner. The G stands for greatest, the C stands for common, and the F stands for factor. So it's greatest common factor. Now, before we do factoring by greatest common factor, I just want to review a few things. I want to make sure that we are all on the same page with a few different things, and one of them is that x squared is equal to x times x, and that x to the third is equal to x times x times x. So you'll notice that x squared, the 2, means 2 x's. The x to the third means 3 x's. If we were to have x to the fourth, it would mean 4. X to the fifth would mean 5, and so on. The other thing I want to review really quickly is just the distributive property. So I can change colors here so we can see it a little differently. So if we think about the distributive property, we have something like, if we had something like 4 times 2x plus 3. The distributive property says, hey, I need to take that 4 and multiply it by the two things that are on the inside, right? So I'm going to multiply it by the 2, and I'm going to multiply it by the 3. But with the 2, we can't forget that x. One of the common things that I saw last week is that people would forget the x when they were doing the distributive properties. So we have 4 times 2x is 8x, and 4 times 3 is 12. So when we distribute, we get 8x plus 12. Okay, another one that kind of was a little bit difficult for us last week is if we had something like 5x, where we have a variable on the outside, and we multiplied that by something like 6x minus 7. Okay, again, we're going to distribute, but now we have this x to deal with. And if you remember from up here, x squared is equal to x times x, right? Well, we're going to do x times x, so that means we're going to get an x squared. So we have 5 times 6 is 30. And then the x times x is x squared, so we'll have 30x squared. And then 5x times 7, well, it's minus, so we got to write that minus sign in there. 5 times 7 is 35, so we have 35x. Greatest common factor. All right, so we are going to factor polynomials using the greatest common factor. And the first example that I'm going to put up here is something like 12x plus 8. Okay, so if I want to factor 12x plus 8, basically what I want to do is I want to take everything out that the two things that have in common, and then leave everything inside a set of parentheses that they don't have in common. Okay, so basically my goal down here at the bottom is to have something on the outside of a parenthesis, and then I want to have two things on the inside of the parenthesis because I have two terms to start with. So 12x is one term, 8 is a second term. So I'm going to have two things on the inside, and they're going to be separated by that plus sign. So I could basically go ahead and write something like that, knowing that this is going to be my answer. So I could even put it in a box saying, hey, this is my answer right here. But now I need to figure out what's going to go on the outside, what's going to go on the inside. Well, there's a method for doing this. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the 12x, and I'm going to write it here. And I'm going to say 12x equals. And then I'm going to write the 8 right here and say 8 equals. And now I'm doing this because, and it may seem kind of simple on this one, but as we get to ones that are more challenging, doing it this way is going to be super helpful. So the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to change colors, and I'm going to go over here and take my 12 and my 8, and I'm going to write down all the factors of 12 and the factors of 8. So I know that 1 times 12 is 12. So 1 and 12 are factors of 12. I know that 2 times 6 is 12, so I can write down a 2 and a 6. And I know that 3 times 4 is 12, so I can write down a 3 and a 4. Okay, and then the other thing I need to do is 8, so I know that 1 times 8 is 8. And the only other one we have is 2 times 4. Okay, so we've made these two lists of factors of 12 and 8. And what I want to do is I want to look at those two lists and I want to say, what's the largest number that's underneath 12 that's also underneath 8? And the thing I want to notice is that I've got a 4 here and I've got a 4 here. Okay, so I'm going to take those 4s and I'm going to rewrite 12 as 3 times 4, or I might actually flip it around and do 4 times 3. And I'm going to rewrite 8 as 4 times 2. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to write this as 4. I'm going to be switching pens here, so bear with me. 4 times 3, and then I want to bring that x along with. And then I'm going to do the same thing for 8, and I'm going to say 8 is equal to 4 times 2. So I'm going to write it as 4, and I'm going to switch pens again, times 2. Okay, and so there's a reason why I use those colors. The pink color is what's called our greatest common factor. It's the factor that 12x and 8 both have in common, and it's the largest one that they have in common. So I'm going to go ahead and write that factor outside of my parentheses. And then what goes on the inside of my parentheses is everything that is left. And in the first spot, I'm going to write everything that's left from 12x, so that would be the 3x. And then in the second spot, I'm going to write everything that's left from 8, and that would be the 2. So when I factor 12x plus 8, using greatest common factor, I end up with 4. And we say this kind of differently. We say it as 4 times the quantity of 3x plus 2. Okay, so that's a fairly straightforward example. So let's do this. Let's take a look at another example that maybe is a little bit more challenging. So I'm going to look at something like, let's say we have 10x squared plus 5x. Okay, I can do the same thing that I did on the previous one where I say, my answer is going to have something on the outside and then two things on the inside separated by a plus sign. I can write 10x squared equals, I can write 5x equals, and then I can come over here and make my list of factors for 10 and 5. I'm going to start with 5 because it's super simple. There's only two, 1 and 5. And then for 10, there's only 4. So we have 1 times 10 is 10, and 2 times 5 is 10. Now, some of you may have noticed right away before we even did this over here that, hey, I know that 5 goes into both 10 and 5. So 5 is actually the greatest common factor. Okay, so we have 5. And then we have, well, what would that be? It would actually be 5 times, oh, here, I got to change colors. 5 times 2, right? And then we have 5 times 1 down here. Ooh, changing colors. All right, and then for the next part, I have to deal with those x's that are with each one of the terms. So if we remember from the first thing we talked about, x squared is equal to x times x, right? So I can write it as x times x, but I'm going to be a little tricky here. I'm going to write 1x is going to be the pink color, and the other x is going to be the blue color. And then down in the bottom, since there's only one x there, I'm going to make it pink, and you're going to see why in a second. So everything that's pink is our greatest common factor. So our greatest common factor is the 5 and the x. So we have 5x as our greatest common factor. And then everything that is left with the 10x squared is going to be what's going to go on the inside in the first spot. So in the first spot, I'm going to write the 2 and the x, so we have 2x. And then in the second spot, I'm going to write a 1. So if I factor 10x squared plus 5x by greatest common factor, I get 5x times the quantity of 2x plus 1. Okay, let's take it one step further. So far, both examples that we've done have had two terms. We've had only two terms in the polynomial. Now, what if we have three terms? What if we have something like 9x to the third plus 6x squared minus 3x? Okay, so the only difference is the third term, right? So we're still going to have a greatest common factor. We're still going to have a parenthesis. But in this case, we're going to have three things on the inside of the parenthesis, and they're going to be separated by a plus sign and a minus sign. So I'm going to have something plus something minus something else. Okay, so I'm going to make my list again. So I have 9x to the third equals 6x squared equals and 3x. Whoa, that didn't look very good. 3x equals. Now notice it was minus 3x, but I didn't put the minus with the 3x down here. It's because I'm taking care of it down here in my answer. I've already written the minus sign down in my answer. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to make my list. So I have 9, I have 6, and I have 3. Now, I'm sure some of you are like, hey, it's 3, Mr. Egbert. Well, you're right, it is 3, because if we start with 3, we only have 1 and 3. And it's fairly obvious that 3 goes into 6 and 3 goes into 9, but it can never hurt to make the list, right? So we have 1 and 9, 3 and 3, 1 and 6, 2 and 3. So we can see here. Now, 9 has 2 3s, but we're only going to circle one of them. So we have 3, 3, 3. So they all have 3 in common. So I'm going to rewrite 9 as 3 times something. I'm going to write 6 as 3 times something, and I'm going to write 3 as 3 times something. So there we go. I've got all my my greatest common factor for my numbers in there. So I know this is 3 times 3. I know this is 3 times 2. Is that a 2? That's not a 2. That's a 2. And then I know this is 3 times 1. Okay, the other thing I want to do is I'm going to write x's. And so this is going to be a little hard to do the way we did it before. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use blue for now. X, 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 because it's x to the third. And this one's x, x, because it's x squared. And this one is just x. Okay, and the thing that I want you to notice is that the bottom one only has one x. So we can only highlight one x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this x here. And I'm going to replace it with a pink x. So we have x, x, x. Now you might be wondering, hey, wait a minute. 9x to the third and 6x squared, they have x's that overlap. Can't we change those to pink too? Nope, because we need to have an x in all three terms in order to be able to highlight it as pink. Since only two of them have two x's, or sorry, one of them has two x's and one of them have one, but only two of them share another x, we can't highlight that as pink. Okay, so our greatest common factor in this case, we've highlighted them in pink, so our greatest common factor is 3x. And then on the inside, we're going to write what we have left. So we have, in the first term, we have 3 and 2 x's, so that's 3x squared. In the second one, we have 2 and an x, so we have 2x. And then in the last one, and the reason I set my answer up before we even do any work is because of this last one. And this last one, a lot of people forget the 1. So we need to make sure we have that 1 in there for our answer. So here we go. If I factor 9x to the third plus 6x squared minus 3x by greatest common factor, I get 3x times the quantity of 3x squared plus 2x minus 1.